Welcome to this Impact for Children webinar on safeguarding children, enabling families to change. My name is Terry McCarthy. I've got 30 years of experience as a manager and practitioner in children's services in a number of local authorities. About 2 years ago, I left my London authority position to set up Impact for Children. I felt that at a time of reducing resources, an increase in demand, and increasingly critical Ofsted inspections, it was time to take a look at how we could do safeguarding a bit better and try to get tighter in terms of the outcomes for children. This has led to the development of the Impact for Children website. The address is on the screen at the moment, and the publication of a book early next year, which will be entitled The Common Sense Guide to Safeguarding Children, 3 Steps to Achieving Best Outcomes. So what are we doing tonight? The focus of tonight's session, we're going to look at how we can enable families to change through looking at planning and looking at the continuous evaluation of risk and solutions. We're going to look at balancing the problem with the solution. We're going to look at how we can establish clarity with families. We're going to look at how we can manage risk and uncertainty, and fundamental change, how we can make sure fundamental change takes place within families for the best outcomes for children. And last but not least, we're going to look at working with children, one-to-one with children, and what that means. Okay, so let's place the enabling children to change within the broader context of the Impact for Children approach. There's 3 steps to this approach to achieve an effective safeguarding. The first is establishing a culture which enables and leads. Secondly, developing a stable, skilled and competent workforce. And thirdly, enabling families to change. So obviously tonight we're going to focus on the third of these. The first and the second one has been the subject of webinars over the last few weeks, and those are available on the Impact for Children website to view. So the important bit here is that step 1 and step 2 leads to the most important of the 3 steps, which is the third one. If the third one isn't achieved, the other 2 steps are really a bit academic. The important bit is that we can enable families to change, because only by doing that can children be safeguarded. So let's start with plans and planning. Here's a quote from President or General Eisenhower. He was both. "I have never achieved anything without planning, but I've never seen a plan that achieved anything." So an enticing quote, one that gives some room for discussion and thought. I think what Eisenhower was referring to here was the difference between a plan, which is a static and inanimate thing, a noun, and the process or the practice of planning, which is active and dynamic. It's a verb, it's a moving, a constantly moving and evolving practice and a process. And I think what President Eisenhower was alluding to here was that the thing that's written on a piece of paper is of limited value, but the process of constantly planning, evaluating and considering what's going on is incredibly important and effective. And I'm going to argue during this webinar that the center of effective safeguarding is the continuous evaluation, the continuous process of planning, which will of course be punctuated by some more static plans to meet with a conference date or a court date or the end of an assessment, and these will exist, but the constant process is what makes effective safeguarding. So we do require plans. They give us a sense of where the child is, the family is at a particular point in time. They give us a line in the sand in which we can compare against in terms of progress and be clear as to what have we achieved. And they're really important in terms of accountability, professional accountability, political accountability, and public accountability. So we must have the plans. They must be on file, dated, signed, a line. However, the important bit to remember, as already stated, is that they are static and they are out of date very, very quickly as the ink dries. And the real flexible, moving, creative, responsive practice comes from the continuous evaluation of change in circumstances, change in risk, change in opportunities, and change in solutions that relate to children and their family. So, in order to unpick some of that continuous evaluation, I posed 13 questions. And this is an expansion of it. There's a number of models like this, but this is hopefully a more detailed model. 13 questions which can be addressed, and these questions can be used as a checklist, if you like, at any meeting, any discussion, supervision, reviews, case monitoring, audits, anywhere where the child is being considered and thought about. So let's run through this. The first question we need to ask ourselves, or ask each other, is are there constructive relationships with the family and partner agencies? Now, we talked in previous webinars, and go back to the early ones that are on Impact for Children, where we looked at effective and constructive relationships in details and the components therein, how to build trust, respect, challenge, support, rapport, addressing conflict, addressing issues, and the whole challenge and support aspects of good, healthy relationships. Relationships are probably the heart of all good practice. The second question is key information being gathered and reviewed? And this is information regarding many aspects of the family, background of the family, attitudes of the family, commitments of the family, contributions from the family, protective family members, and so forth. And just to remind you that each of these questions is never quite finished. We never quite finish these questions. We could always revisit these questions at any point in time. The third question is, are the feelings, views, and experiences of the children, particularly children, the family members, and partner agencies understood? So we need to be asking people, what are your views, what are your feelings, what are your experiences, in order to develop a three-dimensional perspective around the child or the children. So moving forward to question 4, which is, are the carers' vulnerabilities clearly understood? A lot of the reasons, almost always, children are mistreated or neglected because of aspects relating to parental circumstances or choices. Most fundamental, these are alcohol, drug use, untreated mental health, learning disability, emotional difficulties, violent relationships, and so forth. And it's important that we understand those vulnerabilities, because, as we'll see in a second, shifting those is fundamental to protecting the child. Is there understanding of the resilience, strengths, and protective factors? This really feeds in to trying to build some solutions, some ways of addressing the problems. Now, the sixth one is in blue, dark blue, and this infers that this is a very key question. This is one of the cornerstone questions. Is there clarity about the root problems and risk factors which have led to the children being mistreated? Now, as I already said, the root problems are limited in number. They are basically drink, drug use, overuse of drugs or drink or other substances, untreated mental health problems, learning disability, violent relationship, criminal activity, emotionally fragile, and attitudes to children. These are the fundamental problems, the root problems, the fundamental problems which underlie all of mistreatment of children. We've got to be clear what those are and how those link to the risk factors for the child. Risk factors here, kind of thinking about undesired events, undesired outcomes. Number 7, another dark blue, so another key question is there clarity about the mistreatment and the impact of this on the child? Now, this taps right into the journey of the child or the voice of the child. We've already talked earlier on about the views and feelings and experience of the child. But in this one, we're really all coming back to the child once again to look at the impact that this has on the child. How is the child suffering as a result of the mistreatment? What does this mean for the child? This is right at the heart of identifying what needs to happen in order to address things. And as we'll see later, it's also very important in motivating individuals, because there's nothing quite like the voice of the child to capture motivation in individuals, professionals and family. Number 8 is, are there areas of uncertainty? There will always be areas of uncertainty, I suspect. And this links with the 9th one, which is areas of conflict, disagreement, and can it be resolved? So this is about trying to constantly look at what we're uncertain about. How information, views and commitments are evaluated and analysed to create hypotheses and conclusions. Hypothesis, best understood as an intelligent estimate of what is happening. It's, if you like, an educated guess, an intelligent educated guess of what's going on based on the normally partial information that's been gathered. And it's a basis on which further focusing can take place. Conclusions are a bit more final, a bit more balanced, a bit more looks like we know everything we need to know, and we're now come to some conclusions. Okay, so that's number 10. And number 11, is there a workable plan? This is blue again. It's a key question. Is there a workable plan to address the root problems and the risk factors? And it's a workable plan to address the root factors, not to look at more peripheral issues. It's got to get to the heart of the matter. How is change being enabled to take place? And we're going to talk about that tonight, but that's, we need to be enabling change to take place. And the final question is another blue one, which is there real progress, timely progress in reducing the risk factors and the fundamental root problems? If we've done everything but there's no progress on the plan, then we really need to rethink what we're doing. So just to draw out 4 of those 13 questions, the 4 that were in blue, and just to recap on those, these are the 4. If you can get these 4 right, you cannot be going far wrong. The other 9 questions are kind of stitch these together and create some interim stages, if you like, along the way. But these are the 4 real cornerstone questions, which is, why has the child been harmed? What impact is this having on the child? Is there a plan? And is there timely progress against that plan? And if those 4 questions are fundamentally at the heart of the intervention, then it's going to be making real difference to the child. And if it isn't, alternative steps will be taken. If the plan isn't working, then perhaps it may require going to legal proceedings or a different plan. Okay, now let's move on to look at the problem versus the solution. I would argue that one of safeguarding's weaknesses over the last decade or so, at least, probably much longer, is that we've over-focused on the problem. We retell the story of how the child was mistreated, who mistreated them, when they mistreated them, what the evidence for that might be. And all of those are incredibly important. It's incredibly important that we're very clear about those elements. But what we haven't done is to move forward to addressing how we're going to fix that, the solution. And we stay too much with the problem and not enough with finding a solution. We need to get a balance between these two. We don't want all solution and no understanding, because that is a non-stable foundation. And we don't want to stay with the problem. We need to balance the two, be clear what's happened, clear what the problem is, clear how we're going to fix it. The 13 questions are my attempt to find some balance there, to put some meat on the bones, if you like, of both what the problem is and what the solution is. And each of those 13 questions, in a sense, looks both ways. It faces both to the problem and understand that better, but also looking to the solution. Okay, well let's move on to look at how some of that can be put into practice with families. It is incredibly important that we're clear with families as to what we are expecting of them. We need to really put our cards on the table. We need to set out in writing, and we need to reinforce that verbally. what professional involvement will entail, and that'll include what objectives, what is the focus and purpose of involvement, what our expectation of the family is, what the family can expect from us as professionals, when families and professionals will contribute and be consulted in terms of decisions, reports and so forth, and when key decisions are being made. We need to be involved in families, and all members of the families, particularly children at all levels. But we need to be very clear what we're trying to do here. This is the cards on the table. We need to be honest and open. The strong, effective relationships rely totally on a balance between being supportive and being challenging, being honest and being open, saying what needs to be said, but supporting family members to move forward and to address their issues. So again, this is the balancing the solution with the problem. Many individual families can be difficult. It's important to understand that what may appear to be uncooperative or denial or evasion or avoidance might really be down to fear or feeling attacked and humiliated. Parents often feel deeply embarrassed and humiliated at any suggestion that they're not good mums and dads. A lot of uncertainty around what might happen next, whether it actually happens or doesn't really happen. We know it doesn't really happen, but families often fear, based on newspaper reports and incorrect information, that children are often, normally sometimes, snatched in dawn raids. This is incredibly rare, of course, but it doesn't stop parents having that fear level, which can create all kinds of defense mechanisms. So we need to be, by being straight and honest with families, we should be able to help alleviate some of those fears and get them down to a more realistic level. Now, if you go to the Impact for Children website, there is a document which you can download for free called Ensuring Clarity of Involvement, and this includes a draft letter that can be sent to parents outlining what you might want to be clear with them about, all kinds of aspects to what a visit will involve, announced, unannounced visits, what do you need to inform the social worker about, and so forth. So I suggest you get onto the website and have a look at that. It's well worth downloading, I think. Okay, we're now going to turn and look at two aspects of practice that really kind of gets in the way of enabling families to change. The first one is the idea of risk and uncertainty. Now, risk is traditionally measured by looking at the likelihood of an event and the consequences if it occurred. This is based on Peter Brearley model, which he based on the insurance company model. If you want your car insured, they will look at what is the likelihood of you having an accident and consider various aspects to do with that, like your age and your driving history and whatnot. And then the second component will be what are the consequences, and this relates to the value of your car and so forth, and personal injury claims currently in that. And by multiplying these two elements together, they can create a premium for your premium, the cost of your insurance policy down to the penny. The problem with using that kind of model in safeguarding is many of the elements in safeguarding context are very unclear, and they're, as we've talked about in previous webinars, they are very complex, what's referred to as wickets sometimes. They're emerging, uncertain, mutating. You never quite know what the likelihood or consequences of any of undesired events are, and therefore it's difficult to use this kind of model. And we are really relying very much on using the balance of probability. And the balance of probability, just to restate what most people are probably aware of, is it more than 50% likely? Technically, the definition of balance of probability is it 50% more likely to be true than not true. This is the basis of all civil proceedings. If Elton John sues the Daily Mail, he has to prove that he's 51% right. If he is, he wins the damages. If he can't, the Daily Mail win the case. And in a safeguarding context, This is of course heavily emotive, because what you might have is a 70 or 80% balance of probability, leaving still a significant element of doubt, but a decision needs to be made based on what appears to be most correct. Now this period of doubt can be very, very divisive between families and professionals. It can also create massive anxiety and uncomfortableness by professionals and families. And we need to acknowledge this. We need to acknowledge that we cannot be certain. We cannot be 100% right. We're not in the beyond reasonable doubt category that the police are working to in criminal proceedings. It's a much more loose, lower threshold of proof. Now, it's important therefore for professionals to be open about alternative explanation, acknowledge alternative explanation, be clear about what doubts may be there, but also state the reasoning for coming to a decision in the balance of probability, being clear about what elements have been most considered, what elements have been considered to be less important, and through that to be very clear with fellow professionals, with their own managers, with themselves, with the family, the basis on which they came to their decision. We need to be balanced, we need to be fair, we need to be equitable, we need to be proportionate, we need to take all information into consideration in an absolutely fair way. We need to be transparent, we need to be all those things, but we do not have to attempt to be right. We're not attempting to be right, we're just attempting in the balance of probability to say what we think the most likely explanation for injuries or mistreatment of a child are. And it's worth reminding ourselves that a quote from Eileen Monroe, when she said, "The single most important factor in minimizing error is to admit that you may be wrong." So it's stepping back from what could be seen as the arrogant professional who's totally convinced they're right, to actually saying, well, I'm not certain that I'm right, but based on this body of evidence, I am coming to the conclusion that this seems to be the most likely position, the most likely explanation for what's happened. So we can let ourselves, it's important that we're clear about that. Now the second area we need to look at in terms of fundamental change is bringing about fundamental change. Root problems, the fundamental problems which lead to a child being mistreated, are often deep-seated. We've already listed what those are: alcohol, drugs, mental health problems, learning disabilities, deep emotional difficulties, violent partners or violent tendencies, attitudes to children that are abusive, and criminal behaviour. These are the real. Each of those are very deep-seated entrenched. They're probably taking a lifetime to develop. There's a lifetime of experience behind them, and therefore shifting these is naturally incredibly difficult. However, sustainable change in these areas is absolutely essential if we're going to address the harm to children. And this is a fundamental conflict with safeguarding practice. On one hand, we have the very entrenched, deep-seated, difficult to shift problems, difficult to find solutions for, and yet finding solutions to those is essential really if we're going to make some real sustainable lasting change. And what often happens out of this conflict, I would argue, is that professionals they become over-optimistic regarding certain things that have happened. They focus more on peripheral issues. For example, the commitment to go to alcohol classes sessions is seen as evidence of change, when in fact it's really evidence of wanting to change in a sense at best, but it's not real evidence of change until the alcohol consumption has dropped down to a safe level. There is often parents will often say to professionals that they've got massive commitment to change their relationships and the way they do this and the way they do that, and the commitment to taking their medication and so forth, and taking support from family members to help them as in their parental role. The real proof of the pudding is, do they change their lifestyle, do they change their habits, change their patterns to make that sustainably fundamental in their life. It is crucial to address these root problems to achieve sustainable and real change. And this is really what makes safeguarding so incredibly difficult and so incredibly challenging, and often lies behind why professionals, I think, don't get the sufficient shift in the family, and children become mistreated again or become seriously harmed. And we see this in a lot of serious case reviews where real fundamental change hasn't taken place despite years of involvement. And it is incredibly difficult. We're going to move in the next webinar next Tuesday night, on the 11th of November, is going to start looking at how we bring about change and how do we create shift within that. So that's something to look towards. But we need to find ways in which we can motivate parents to really shift their behaviours and change. Okay, so last but not least, we're going to look at working with children. Now, it comes as no surprise. It's been said many, many times for many, many years that sitting down, working one-to-one with children is fundamental to good safeguarding practice. However, we've seen in many, many serious case reviews, many Ofsted inspections, many, many audits, that it is a very rare occurrence when this is done to great depth and done fully. There's many reasons for this, and children require considerable time to build trust and confidence, and this requires a lot of patience, sensitivity, flexibility, tenacity of the professional. The child will not simply start talking very often, particularly younger children. They don't want to get their families into trouble, they're nervous, they're scared, they don't know what's going to happen next, they haven't built trust. They've got all kinds of messages from the family about don't talk to the professionals, maybe. So we don't know. There's many, many things going on, and it takes time to overcome that. And it's important that practitioners work with their managers to find the time and the space, the professional space and the physical time, not only in terms of the hour this week, but the hour this week, the hour next week, and the week after, and the week after, over a number of sessions to really start to allow the child to settle down. We'll do a webinar shortly about working with children, and when we get to that, I'll talk through ways in which you can engage with children by asking a series of very simple, straightforward questions. If you're interested in any of that information, drop us a quick email and I'll send you some information on it. Some really easy questions to start getting the first few sessions going, gain the child's trust without invading the child, without going into very difficult areas. Difficult areas have to be going into, but the building of trust can be done through easier, simpler, more everyday matters. This is critical, crucial to understanding the child's experience, views and feelings, as we already said. And this is where the journey and the voice of the child really starts to come out. We've got to spend time with children. We've got to find time to sit down and start to really understand their voice, their journey, their experience, their feelings, their views. To do so, to get the views of the child, hear what the child is saying, is probably one of the strongest ways of influence and in gaining commitment and motivation from family members and agencies. There's nothing quite as powerful as hearing what the child has been said for parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, other professionals, brothers and sisters, to really understand the need for change and the need to address the fundamental problems that are causing the child to feel upset, worried, neglected and mistreated. And so the voice of the child is just the absolute powerful, the most powerful voice in the professional series of views and opinions. And they provide incredibly clear information regarding whether intervention is effective. If a child is happier, going to school, contented, having breakfast in the morning, feeling happy going to bed, knows where their clothes are, the bed is comfortable, their life is working well, the mum is become predictable in her behaviour, perhaps, whatever that. If the child is now becoming happier, I think it's real evidence that real change has taken place. And that brings us to our last but I think important issue, which is the ultimate, I'm not sure if that's spelled correctly, but the ultimate performance indicator. If the child is clearly happier and more content and feeling more at ease with their life, the intervention, professional intervention, almost certainly has worked. Clearly has worked. The evidence is clearly there. So that's the end of the webinar. For further information, here's the website to visit. If you have any questions, email me at that address. There's a landline number there and my mobile number. Feel free to use that. And if there's any questions around the webinar, any questions around the Impact for Children approach, or anything that you feel might be helpful to your own particular service or practice. And the next webinar will be next Tuesday, the 11th of November. And we're going to start looking at, we're going to start digging down into more depth into each of the 3 steps. And the one next week will dig deep into one of the key issues relating to establishing a culture which enables and leads. And this is about learning and positive change. Looking at why change is difficult, how to motivate, motivational theory and practice, the process of change, and all of this is looking at how we can bring about change with professionals, developing practitioners and managers, and also how we can enable change with families, because within the culture of safeguarding, it's important to think about how change relates to professional ability and skill, and also the family. So today, the recording of tonight's webinar will be available in about 2 days' time on the website, and you can go on to the bulletin board will give you the instructions for joining the next webinar next week, or you can view it on Impact for Children website from the 14th of November onwards. So many thanks for joining the webinar, many thanks for viewing the webinar, and we'll see you soon. All the best.